The air in the office had shifted. Though the days unfolded much the same, meetings, reports, and the never-ending demands of Blackwood Enterprises, Alina couldn't ignore the wary glances or whispered conversations that seemed to follow her now. Grace's warning played on repeat in her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. Leo, as always, remained unflappable. He carried on as though nothing had changed, his focus laser-sharp, his demeanor as commanding as ever. But when they were alone, the weight of their secret threatened to crack the fragile balance they had built. It wasn't long before that balance shattered. The tipping point came during a heated boardroom meeting. A crucial deal was on the table, one that Leo had spent months preparing for. Alina had worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure every detail was perfect, from the financial projections to the presentation itself. The meeting should have been routine. But as Leo presented their pitch, one of the board members, a sly, silver-haired man named Paul Donovan, interrupted with a smirk that set Alina's teeth on edge. "This all looks impressive, Leo," Paul said, leaning back in his chair. "But I can't help but wonder if your focus has been divided lately." Leo's jaw tightened. "My focus is exactly where it needs to be, Paul." Paul's gaze flicked to Alina, his smirk widening. "Of course. Though it does seem like you've been spending an awful lot of time with your assistant these days." A murmur rippled through the room, and Alina felt her cheeks flush. Her stomach churned as Paul's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. "That's enough," Leo said, his tone cold and authoritative. Paul raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just making an observation." The tension in the room was suffocating, but Leo pressed on, steering the meeting back on track with a level of control that left no room for dissent. By the time it ended, Alina felt like she could finally breathe again. But the damage was done. Later that evening, Alina sat at her desk, her mind racing. The boardroom confrontation had been a stark reminder of the precarious position she was in. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how professional she tried to be, her relationship with Leo was a ticking time bomb. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear him approach until he spoke. "Alina!" She jumped, turning to find Leo standing behind her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. Concern, perhaps, or frustration. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. Wordlessly, she followed him to his office. Once the door was closed, he turned to face her, his hands resting on his hips. "Donovan crossed a line today," he said, his tone sharp. "I won't tolerate anyone undermining you. Or us." Alina folded her arms, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's not just Donovan, Leo. People are talking. Grace called me into her office yesterday to remind me about the company's policy on workplace relationships." His eyes narrowed. "Grace did what?" "She wasn't wrong," Alina said quickly, not wanting to escalate the situation. Whatever we're doing, it's complicated. And it's affecting more than just us." Leo ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping. "I don't care what they think. This is my company, and I won't let anyone dictate how I live my life." "But it's not just your life," she said, her voice rising. "It's mine too. And I'm the one who's going to take the fall, if this blows up." His expression softened, and he took a step closer. "Alina, I would never let that happen." Her throat tightened. "You can't control everything, Leo. And you can't protect me from the consequences of this." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was thick, their emotions raw. Then, as if drawn by some invisible force, Leo closed the distance between them. His hands cupped her face, his touch both tender and desperate. "Alina," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You mean more to me than I can even explain. And I know this isn't easy, but I can't walk away from you. I won't." Her heart ached at the sincerity in his words. She wanted to believe him, to trust that they could find a way to make this work. But the weight of the risks they were taking felt crushing. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Yes, you can," he said firmly. "Because we're in this together. Whatever happens, we'll face it. Together." Before she could respond, he kissed her. This kiss wasn't like the others they had shared. It was fierce, almost urgent, as if he were trying to convey everything he couldn't say. And for a moment, Alina let herself forget the doubts and the fears, losing herself in the intensity of his touch. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads resting together, Leo spoke again. "If this is too much for you, tell me now," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "But if you're willing to fight for this, for us, then I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes to make it work." Alina closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. But as she looked into Leo's eyes, she saw a man who was willing to risk everything for her. And she realized that she was willing to do the same. "I'm in," she said softly. Leo smiled, his relief palpable. "Good." But even as they held each other, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that the storm brewing around them was far from over. And this time, crossing the line might cost them more than they were prepared to lose. The storm broke less than a week later. Alina woke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. She groaned, squinting at the screen, but the barrage of notifications jolted her wide awake. Emails, text messages, and a series of missed calls lit up the screen. The subject lines were all variations of the same theme. CEO scandal exposed. Inside the billionaire's secret romance. Leo Blackwood and the mystery woman. Is this the end of Blackwood Enterprises? Her stomach dropped. Heart pounding, she opened one of the links. The article was plastered with photos, grainy shots of her and Leo leaving his penthouse, entering the office together, even walking side by side at the gala. Exclusive sources confirm that Alina Carter, a junior employee at Blackwood Enterprises, is the secret girlfriend of Billionaire CEO Leo Blackwood. The alleged romance raises questions about favoritism, ethical violations, and the CEO's ability to lead. The room spun as she read. How had this happened? Who had taken those photos? And how did the media get hold of them? A sharp knock on her door snapped her out of her panic. "Alina," came Leo's voice, low but insistent. She scrambled out of bed, throwing on a robe before opening the door. Leo stood there, looking as though he hadn't slept. His jaw was tight, his blue eyes blazing with barely contained fury. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Alina crossed her arms, struggling to keep her emotions in check. "I've seen the articles. What the hell is going on, Leo?" "Someone leaked the photos," he said, his tone sharp but controlled. "I've already had my team start an internal investigation. We'll figure out who's behind this." Her mind raced, but the sense of betrayal was impossible to ignore. "How could this happen? You're supposed to have security, privacy." "I do," he snapped, then took a deep breath, visibly reining himself in. "And whoever did this breached that security. They'll pay for it, I promise you." But his assurances did little to calm the storm inside her. She began pacing, her thoughts tumbling over one another. "Leo, this isn't just about us anymore. The articles are saying things about favoritism, ethics. My reputation is on the line. Yours too." "I can handle my reputation," he said firmly. "I'm more concerned about you." She stopped, turning to face him. "Me? I'm the mystery woman. Do you have any idea what this kind of attention will do to my career? My life?" Leo's expression softened, and he took a step closer, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "I know this is overwhelming, but we'll get through it. Together." His words were meant to comfort, but they didn't quell the rising anxiety in her chest. By the time they reached the office later that morning, the situation had spiraled even further. Paparazzi swarmed the entrance, shouting questions and snapping photos as Leo's driver ushered them through the chaos.
"Leo,
is this your girlfriend? Alina, did you use your position to get ahead? Are the board members calling for your resignation, Mr. Blackwood?" Alina kept her head down, gripping Leo's arm as they navigated the frenzy. Once inside, the tension only grew. The office buzzed with whispered conversations, employees darting glances at her as she passed. They made their way to Leo's private conference room, where his top advisors were already gathered. The mood was grim. "This is a PR nightmare," said Grace, her tone clipped. She slid a folder across the table toward Leo. Social media is exploding. The board is demanding a meeting, and investors are starting to panic. Leo opened the folder, his jaw tightening as he scanned the contents. "We're Lisa's statement. Control the narrative before it gets any worse." "And what narrative would that be?" Grace asked pointedly. "That you're romantically involved with an employee? That you've jeopardized the company's integrity over a personal relationship?" Alina flinched at the harshness of her words, but Leo remained steadfast. "I don't answer to tabloid speculation," he said coldly. "This is a personal matter, not a corporate one." "With respect," Grace replied, her tone firm. It stopped being personal the moment it hit the headlines. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Hours later, Alina sat in her small office, staring blankly at her computer screen. The day had passed in a haze of damage control and whispered speculation. She felt like a ghost in her own life, invisible yet painfully exposed. A soft knock at her door broke the silence. "Come in," she said, expecting another flustered assistant with more bad news. Instead, Leo stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice low. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "How do you think? My entire life just got turned into a scandal." He walked over, sitting on the edge of her desk. "I know this is hard, Alina, but I meant what I said earlier. We'll get through this. Together." She looked up at him, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'm not sure if we can, Leo. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone else, your company, your employees, the people who look up to you. How can we keep going when the world is watching our every move?" Leo reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Because we don't let them dictate our lives. Let them watch. Let them speculate. The only people who matter in this equation are you and me." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. "And what happens if the board forces you to choose? Me or the company?" He hesitated, the weight of her question hanging in the air. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "I built this company from the ground up," he said. "But I won't let it come between us. Not now. Not ever." His words were a promise, but they did little to ease the fear gnawing at her. Because no matter how much Leo cared for her, the world around them wasn't going to let them off that easily. And as the headlines continued to swirl and the pressure mounted, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was about to face its greatest test yet. By the time the board meeting was called, the tension at Blackwood Enterprises was unbearable. Every corner of the office buzzed with speculation about how Leo and Alina would navigate the storm of scandal. Rumors swirled that the board was considering drastic measures to protect the company's reputation. Leo had assured Alina repeatedly that he had everything under control, but as she sat outside the sleek glass-walled conference room waiting for him to emerge, her faith in that assurance wavered. She could see him through the glass, standing at the head of the table, his tall frame commanding as he faced the board members. Even with the soundproof walls, the intensity of the meeting was palpable. Several board members gestured emphatically, their expressions ranging from concerned to outright hostile. "Alina!" The voice startled her, and she turned to see Paul Donovan, the silver-haired board member who had first alluded to her relationship with Leo. He leaned against the wall, his sharp suit impeccable, his eyes gleaming with a mix of pity and triumph. "I see Leo's keeping you in the dark," Paul said, his tone dripping with faux concern. She bristled. "I'm not interested in whatever you're trying to imply, Paul." He chuckled softly. "Oh, Alina, I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. The board isn't going to let this blow over quietly. They're demanding accountability. That means Leo will have to make sacrifices." Her stomach twisted, but she kept her voice steady. "Sacrifices?" Paul's smirk widened. "You, my dear. The board wants Leo to sever all ties with you. They see you as a liability, someone who jeopardizes the company's integrity. If he wants to keep his position, he'll have to make a choice." Alina felt the blood drain from her face. "You're lying." "Am I?" Paul leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Leo might care for you, but at the end of the day, he's a businessman. and businessmen always protect their assets. Before she could respond, the door to the conference room opened, and the board members filed out one by one. Paul straightened, giving her a final, smug glance before disappearing down the hallway. Leo was the last to leave, his face a mask of calm as he approached her. "It's done," he said simply, his tone unreadable. Alina stood, her heart pounding. "What's done?" "The board has agreed to let me handle the situation on my own terms," he said, his hand brushing her arm in a reassuring gesture. "There's nothing to worry about." But Paul's words echoed in her mind, and doubt crept in. "Leo, what aren't you telling me?" His jaw tightened, but he shook his head. "Nothing that matters. I told you. I won't let them come between us." His words should have comforted her, but they didn't. The following day, Alina arrived at the office to find her desk cleared. Her belongings were packed neatly into a cardboard box, and a thin envelope sat on top. Her chest constricted as she opened the envelope and read the letter inside. "Miss Carter, effective immediately, your position at Blackwood Enterprises has been terminated. Please contact HR for details regarding your severance package." Her hands shook as she clutched the letter, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Alina. She turned to see Grace, the head of HR, standing nearby with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry," Grace said quietly. "I wasn't given a choice." This came from the top. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. "The top? You mean Leo?" Grace didn't respond, but her silence was answer enough. By the time Alina made it to Leo's office, anger and heartbreak roiled inside her. She burst through the door without knocking, clutching the termination letter in her hand. "Care to explain this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Leo looked up from his desk, his expression grim. "Alina." "Don't," she snapped, cutting him off. "Don't you dare try to spin this. You promised me, Leo. You said we were in this together. So why the hell am I being fired?" He stood, his calm exterior cracking as he stepped toward her. "I had no choice. The board wanted me gone," she finished for him, her voice rising. "And you gave them what they wanted. You chose them over me." "That's not true," he said, his voice firm. "I fought for you, Alina. I fought harder than you realize. But the board made it clear they would force me out if I didn't take action. If I lose my position, I lose the ability to protect this company, my employees, and everything I've built." "And me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What about protecting me?" His eyes darkened with pain, but he didn't answer. The silence was deafening. Alina let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "You know, Paul warned me this would happen. He said you'd sacrifice me to save yourself. I didn't believe him. But he was right, wasn't he?" "Don't listen to Paul," Leo said sharply. "He's trying to manipulate you." "Maybe," she said bitterly. "But at least he didn't pretend to care about me while stabbing me in the back." Leo flinched, the words cutting deeper than she intended. But she was too hurt, too furious to stop. "I gave up everything for this job, for you," she said, her voice breaking. "And now you've made sure I have nothing left." "Alina," he said, reaching for her. She stepped back, her tears blurring her vision. "Don't. Just don't." With that, she turned and walked out, the sound of the door slamming behind her echoing through the office. That night, Alina sat alone in her apartment, the cardboard box of her belongings on the floor beside her. She replayed the events of the day over and over, each memory cutting deeper than the last. She had trusted Leo. She had let herself believe that he would fight for her, that their connection was strong enough to withstand the pressures of his world. But in the end, she had been nothing more than a liability, someone he could discard to save himself. The betrayal was more than she could bear. And as the tears streamed down her face, she made a decision. She wasn't going to let this break her. Leo Blackwood might have given up on her, but she wasn't about to give up on herself. The cracks began to show within days of the media frenzy. Despite Leo's confident assurances that they could withstand the storm, Alina felt the weight of scrutiny pressing down on her from every direction. Whispers followed her in the office halls, and her inbox overflowed with venomous emails from strangers accusing her of everything from opportunism to sabotage. Leo tried to shield her, but the relentless pressure tested even his unflappable resolve. Meetings with the board became tense, and the company's stock price wavered as speculation about his leadership dominated headlines.
But the true blow came from within.
It started innocuously enough, a forwarded email from a colleague containing a leaked internal memo. Alina opened it on instinct, her blood running cold as she read the contents. From Paul Donovan. Subject: Proposal for Leadership Transition. Paul had outlined his case for replacing Leo as CEO, citing the media scandal as evidence of his deteriorating judgment. The email also contained thinly veiled jabs at Alina, describing her as a distraction and questioning her qualifications for her position. Alina's hands trembled as she reread the memo. Paul had always been antagonistic, but this was a direct threat, not just to Leo's career, but to everything they had worked for together. She hurried to Leo's office, where she found him standing by the window, staring out at the city. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, his expression softening slightly when he saw her. "Something wrong?" he asked, his voice calm despite the turmoil surrounding them. She handed him her phone. "You need to see this." Leo's face darkened as he read the email. His jaw tightened, and a cold fury flashed in his eyes. "Donovan," he muttered, the name dripping with venom. "What are we going to do?" Alina asked, her voice shaking. Leo set the phone down and ran a hand through his hair. "I'll handle it."
"But—"
"Alina," he interrupted, stepping closer. "I've dealt with people like Donovan before. He wants to undermine me, but I won't let him. Trust me." She nodded, though a knot of unease coiled in her stomach. The betrayal didn't end there. 2 days later, a second leak hit the news cycle, this time documents purporting to show that Alina's promotion within Blackwood Enterprises was tied to her relationship with Leo. The story spread like wildfire, fueling accusations of favoritism and corruption. Alina was horrified. She knew the documents were fake. She'd worked hard to earn her position, and her performance had been praised even before she and Leo had crossed the line. But the damage was done. That night, as Alina paced her apartment, her phone rang. It was Leo. "I know who's behind this," he said without preamble.
"Who?"
"Donovan," he spat. "He's been working with a tabloid journalist to fabricate this story. My legal team is preparing a response, but it's going to take time to clear your name." Her heart sank. And until then, Leo's silence spoke volumes. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Alina was summoned to an emergency meeting with Grace and the board, where she was informed that an investigation had been launched into her conduct. Though the investigation was ostensibly about maintaining transparency, it felt more like a witch hunt. "We need to maintain the company's integrity," Grace said, her tone clipped. "Until the investigation is complete, you'll be placed on administrative leave." Alina stared at her, stunned. "You're suspending me?" "It's a temporary measure," Grace said, avoiding her gaze. "I'm sure you understand." She didn't. But she knew better than to argue. When Alina told Leo about the suspension, his reaction was swift and furious. "They can't do this," he growled, pacing his penthouse. "You've done nothing wrong." "It doesn't matter," she said quietly. "They need someone to blame, and I'm the easiest target." Leo stopped pacing and turned to face her. "Then I'll resign. If I step down, the pressure will shift off you." "No," Alina said firmly, shaking her head. "You've worked too hard for this. I won't let you throw it all away because of me." "I don't care about the company," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I care about you." Her chest tightened. "And I care about you. Which is why you can't let them win." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. "We'll fight this," Leo said finally, his voice steady. "Together." But as Alina looked into his eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was far from over, and that the cost of winning might be more than either of them was prepared to pay. Alina's suspension marked the beginning of a new kind of isolation. For the first time since joining Blackwood Enterprises, she was no longer part of the company's inner workings. Her days, once filled with meetings, projects, and late-night strategy sessions with Leo, were now empty and restless. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was deafening. The media frenzy showed no signs of slowing. Every day brought fresh headlines dissecting her relationship with Leo and speculating about the future of Blackwood Enterprises. Alina avoided social media entirely, knowing the vitriol she'd find there would only make things worse. Leo called her frequently, keeping her updated on the company's response and reassuring her that he was working to clear her name. But even his words of comfort couldn't erase the gnawing sense of helplessness she felt. "You don't have to do this alone," he told her one night. "I'm here for you." "I know," she said softly. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was dragging him down. The board meeting that followed was a turning point. Leo stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding as he faced the members of his own company. Alina wasn't there to witness it, but when he recounted the events to her later, she could hear the fire in his voice. "I told them that if they wanted to question my leadership, they could do so openly," he said. "But I wouldn't stand by and let them scapegoat you." "And what did they say?" she asked, holding her breath. "They backed off."
"For now," he said.
"But it's clear that Donovan won't stop until he gets what he wants." Alina frowned. "And what does he want?" "To take my place," Leo said darkly. The breaking point came when Donovan leaked one final piece of false information, an internal email supposedly written by Alina, implying that she had influenced a major business decision in Leo's favor. Leo's fury was palpable when he discovered the truth. "He's crossed the line," he said, his voice like steel. "It's time to end this." And end it he did. Leo Blackwood was a man of precision. He built his empire by seeing the angles no one else noticed, by striking when others hesitated. And now, with Paul Donovan's betrayal clear and Alina's reputation in shreds, his focus sharpened to a singular purpose: protect Alina, protect the company, and end the chaos Donovan had unleashed. But this time, it wasn't just business. This was personal. The tension in Blackwood Tower was palpable as Leo prepared for the emergency board meeting he'd called. Word had spread about the showdown brewing between him and Donovan, and everyone, from junior associates to senior executives, seemed to be holding their breath. Leo had been uncharacteristically quiet that morning, his usual sharp commands replaced with a steely silence as he reviewed the documents his legal team had compiled. Alina, still on administrative leave, was at her apartment, pacing the floor and waiting for news. She had wanted to be there, to stand beside Leo in the fight against Donovan. But Leo had insisted she stay away. "You've been through enough," he'd said the night before, his voice firm but his touch gentle as he cupped her face. "Let me handle this." And so she waited, her heart pounding with every passing minute. At precisely 10 a.m., Leo strode into the boardroom. He was dressed in his usual tailored suit, every detail immaculate, but there was an edge to him that hadn't been there before, a simmering intensity that commanded attention. The board members were already seated, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. At the far end of the table sat Paul Donovan, his expression smug and self-assured. "Thank you all for coming," Leo began, his voice calm but resolute. He placed a thick folder on the table and folded his hands in front of him. "I've called this meeting to address the recent leaks and the damage they've caused to both my personal reputation and the integrity of this company." Donovan leaned back in his chair, his smirk widening. "Leo, if this is about the—" Leo held up a hand, cutting him off. "You'll have your turn, Paul. For now, I suggest you listen carefully." Donovan's smirk faltered, but he said nothing. Leo turned his attention to the rest of the board. "Over the past few weeks, the leaks have targeted not only me but also one of our most dedicated employees, Alina Carter. These attacks have been baseless, malicious, and calculated to undermine this company's leadership." He opened the folder and pulled out a series of documents. "What you see here is evidence of who is truly behind these leaks. Emails, phone records, and testimony from our IT department all point to one person, Paul Donovan." A collective gasp rippled through the room. "That's absurd," Donovan said, his voice rising. "You can't possibly believe." "I believe the evidence," Leo said, his tone icy. He slid a stack of papers down the table, stopping just in front of Donovan. Go ahead. Read it. Every fake document you planted, every tabloid contact you bribed, it's all there. Donovan's face turned pale as he flipped through the pages. Leo continued, his voice steady, but filled with contempt. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed this company, its employees, and its investors. Your actions have jeopardized deals worth billions and tarnished the reputation of an innocent woman. And for what? A pathetic attempt to take my place? The room fell silent, the weight of Leo's words hanging heavy in the air. Back at her apartment, Alina's phone buzzed with a call. She grabbed it, her hands trembling when she saw Leo's name on the screen. How did it go? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It's over, he said, his voice calm but tired. Donovan's been removed from the board. He'll be facing legal action for what he's done. Relief flooded through her, but it was quickly followed by a fresh wave of anxiety. And what about me? You're cleared, Leo said gently. The board agreed that the allegations against you were baseless. You'll be reinstated immediately, if that's what you want. Alina let out a shaky breath.
Of course I want that.
But Leo, she hesitated, unsure how to put her thoughts into words. What is it? He asked, his tone softening. I'm not sure if I can go back to the way things were. Everyone knows about us now. They'll never stop talking, never stop looking for ways to bring us down. I don't care what they say, Leo said firmly. Let them talk. Let them speculate. None of it matters as long as we're together. His words were reassuring, but they didn't erase the doubts swirling in her mind. And what about the company? Won't this hurt your leadership? I've built this company to withstand far worse, he said. But I can't build anything without you, Alina. You're what matters most to me. Her heart swelled at his words, but the fear remained. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything, Leo. You're not, he said, his voice steady. You're the reason I'm willing to fight for everything. Later that evening, Leo arrived at her apartment, a bottle of wine in hand and a determined look in his eyes. They sat together on her couch, the weight of the day's events finally lifting as they talked late into the night. For the first time in weeks, Alina felt like she could breathe again. Are you sure about this? She asked as they sat in the quiet of her living room. I've never been more sure of anything, he said, taking her hand in his. This isn't just about the company, Alina. It's about us. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect what we have. As he pulled her into his arms, Alina felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in weeks. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Leo by her side, she knew they could face whatever challenges came their way. Because when it came to matters of the heart, neither of them was willing to back down.